Okay, in this video, we're going to add some silhouettes to our sunset background. A silhouette is something that is backlit, and so we don't see any detail within the object. It just is a solid black. And I like silhouettes because, so here are some examples of some tree silhouettes we're going to do. I like that we practice with this first because we don't have to worry about color or texture. All we have to worry about is shapes of trees and how to use our brush to get realistic shapes. Okay, so first off, let me show you some bad examples of tree silhouettes. They're not colored in black, but trees with leaves, you know, their shape is different. Lots of times we really exaggerate the trunk and then under-exaggerate the shape of the leaves. But if you look at an example of a tree, the branches and where the leaves are much bigger than we like to think, and the trunk is a lot shorter and smaller. Pine trees, everyone wants to do a perfect Christmas tree. Our brain likes pattern. Our brain doesn't easily do randomness, and nature is random. And so have you ever picked out a real Christmas tree? You'd see that there is no perfect Christmas tree. There's always holes and they're lopsided, and so that's why I like this reference for pine trees, is because it shows how irregular pine trees actually are. So we don't want perfect Christmas tree pine trees, okay? And then palm trees as well. You know, these are just perfectly even on both sides, perfectly spaced apart. So you first want to get a reference that shows kind of more realistic, natural shapes of trees, okay? Not that perfect, ideal tree. Okay, so once we have some references, we're going to try out some different trees. I'm going to start with a pine tree, okay? And you'll want a really small brush. And even the smallest looking brush can make a fat line if you're not careful with it. So I'm going to dip. So first thing you want to do is just dip the very tip of the brush in paint. You don't want it all gooped up full of paint. So that's when we're using color, if you use your brush to mix up color, your brush gets full of paint and then it's no longer delicate anymore. So you just want to dip the tip in. And then you also need to have a delicate touch. If you press hard, you're still going to get a fat line, even though this is a small brush, okay? So when I'm using it, I kind of support my hand with my pinky. So I'm holding my brush up above my thing, and then I can just very gently drag the very tip of the brush along, and you get a thinner line that way, okay? Also, if it's ever, you know, full of paint, you just wipe off the paint on a paper towel, and you can, in that wiping, you're kind of pulling the bristles down to a point as well, okay? All right, so a pine tree. Let's put a pine tree silhouette right here. So you want to start with the trunk, and it's the skinnier at the top and then thicker at the bottom. Okay, and then I'm going to start at the top, and I'm just going to use my brush to put some irregular, kind of squiggly branches out. And I don't want to be too careful about it because then you'll end up doing a perfect pattern, okay? So I actually kind of go quickly and kind of swing my brush out so that I get more irregular shapes. Don't be afraid to leave some gaps on one side or on both sides, okay? And just gradually, your marks are going to get a little bit bigger. And wider. And a lot of students use a brush kind of like a sponge to create their texture for them. You don't really want your brush, your bristles to make the texture. You want your brush strokes to make the texture. Okay, so these areas right here that have, you know, a bigger branch but with smaller branches coming off of it, we'll do that. Okay, and there's an example of a pine tree started. Okay, let's talk about a palm tree now. So a palm tree, I'm going to do, and this isn't going to be a very realistic painting, this is just where I'm practicing stuff. Okay, so I have my trunk. Now I'm going to add some of the basic shape of the, I think you call them fronds. And you can simplify, but there's usually a lot more than we think. And I'm paying close attention to my reference, so I'm getting kind of the direction of them right. Let's see if I can move this over so you can see my reference. Okay, and then it's very important to pay attention to the direction of the individual. Okay, this is the hardest thing. Those, the little leaves on the fronds are very, very delicate and thin. So I'm using a very delicate touch. I'm holding my brush very high up above and just paying attention to my reference photo to get the direction of those leaves correct. And you don't want like a solid line here, so I'm going to look for any areas where the silhouettes just kind of create a black blob. You can paint those blobs in. If you get too big of a line, it's all right. Just make it part of the bigger silhouette. And just try and pay attention to the inconsistencies. Like I said, our brain really likes pattern. Our brain really likes to just go in automatic mode and just keep making the mark without really looking. So make sure to pay attention to your reference photos for the irregularities, the unexpected randomness and irregularities in your tree. So you don't end up with a perfect kind of ideal fake looking palm tree. All right, and I'm going to call that one good. And then this kind of tree with no leaves would probably be the hardest tree to do because it's tons and tons and tons of little branches. But something to think about, I always like to talk about deciduous trees. Deciduous trees are the type where their leaves fall off, not pine trees or palm trees. Okay, so I talked about how, you don't want to over-exaggerate your trunk, okay? And tree limbs are like body limbs. They're always bigger at the base where they meet the bigger tree, and then they always have to get skinnier as they go on. Okay, so that's one rule of trees that you want to follow, that they're always getting smaller towards the end, and you always want it bigger. People have the tendency to make them more like tubes, like just parallel. But if you always make sure they're bigger at the base and then taper off, it'll be good. Okay, one thing I do to help myself kind of paint a tree more randomly is, it's a trick I learned from a friend. And it's kind of hard to do, but it creates kind of a cool line, is if you can twist your brush while you drag it along. I'm like twirling it in my hand. It kind of gives you less control and creates this kind of wiggly, more random looking line. So I don't do it on everything, but just if I want things to be a little more natural looking and to lose a little bit of my own control, just twirl my brush and you end up with kind of a nice wiggly line. And then you can go back and, this needs to be thicker and taper out. Okay, so I'm not going to do a whole tree like that. I don't recommend you do it either. Okay, so now let's talk about adding leaves to this tree. So if I were doing this kind of tree right here, I'd want to draw the branches that I can see, and then the rest is going to be filled in with leaves. And basically with leaves, it's like a lot of little dots. Now again, I don't want you to use a big brush and kind of create it like a sponge, where you have lots of little texture that way. I want you to create the look of leaves with actual blobs of paint, okay, with a small brush. And you just want to make sure that you leave holes, because, leaves overlap and, they leave little holes, basically. So again, you're looking at your reference to see those irregular shapes and see a realistic way of where to put your leaves. Edges of trees are very important. And I always have a few dots just kind of hanging out off the edge. Okay, as you can see, that would take a while because it's just a lot. There's not any area that's totally solid black that I just want to paint black. It's just a series of, it's like you're painting every individual leaf and how it overlaps, okay? So I hope that gives you an idea of what to do. You can also practice other silhouettes that you want. You could do cactuses, you could do grass. The thing with grass is that you need to do a flicking motion so that your grass is thicker at the base and thins out. And probably the base of the grass would be mostly filled in dark. Okay? All right, thanks for watching.